Everybody ready?
Live streaming and unmuted and.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is a special laws and rules meeting, and it is 7:10. We're calling the meeting to order. This meeting is simply to discuss the Kingston Forward zoning. There will be no vote tonight, but we will discuss and ask questions. We have our consultants here, they're on Zoom, right? And Bartek and our housing director is here, who's also going to speak to us. Okay? Prior to doing that, though, I'm going to give the floor to Council President Andrea, and she's going to make us aware of some things.
Yeah, there were questions from public members and council members about steps moving forward, so I just want to talk through an outline. As we mentioned, there's no vote, nothing is being voted on today. And everything that I'm going to say doesn't necessarily have to happen at the next meeting, so if we need more time, we will take more time. I just want to make that perfectly clear. And this roadmap suggestion is based off of the 3 deep dives that we had earlier in the spring, based on conversations we've had through, just conversations we've had between amongst ourselves, and of course, conversations we've had with public members. Tonight, again, I just wanted to make clear, because after speaking to a couple, one member of the press and a couple public members, tonight's intent is just to have given this huge, important issue the attention it deserves, and not an emergency meeting. So that's why there's no vote for this, and I just wanted to make that clear, because I don't know if I was clear enough a month ago when that was, when we decided to do this. So what I am suggesting is to take, and this is again based off the deep dives, to take 3 different pieces that have been more controversial and have had more issues with council and public, take those separately. Again, not voting today, but maybe taking them for next month, and if the Laws and Rules Committee feels that they're ready, they can vote on that. If they want further discussions, they can wait on that too, but have these resolutions at least ready to go for June's Laws and Rules meeting. Those 3 are the parking, short-term rentals, and affordability. So with the parking, I also just wanted to bring to your attention that, I know that was our first deep dive, and that was months ago. Since then, I've been able to work with public members on developing a plan to do a parking management plan, starting with a parking inventory that is would be citywide. I know there are concerns, snow emergency. Tony Davis brought up the outdoor dining that we talked about, I believe in the April Laws and Rules meeting. All of this could be part of that, to kind of see what we have in the city, what we could do to better parking and to make some of these issues less problematic. Specifically, I'm thinking the snow emergency. So I'm going to be presenting that to the Finance Committee in June. Just to hire a consultant for parking inventory. The reason why I'm suggesting hiring a consultant, an outside consultant, because we don't have that kind of department here that would have that expertise, unlike something like the housing director being able to do some of the housing issues here. We would have to hire outside. So I just wanted to let you know that that's coming, and Mayor Noble's on board with that as well. So that might affect the conversation tonight when we talk about parking. And then the other thing that I'm suggesting with the affordability resolution is to add on to that, or within that, is to form a housing work group. It could be, and this is just off the top of my head, well, after talking with a few people, but it could be changed, is my point. Housing director, maybe 3 members of the common council, keep it below a quorum, so we wouldn't have an actual committee in it, and maybe a couple members of the public, to be able to to keep their eyes on this, to offer any suggestions moving forward. I mean, this housing crisis has been going on for a long time, and it's going to continue to go on, and I think it behooves us to stay on top of it. So that's what I'm suggesting as part of that third resolution. So the idea is to take those three resolutions separately, vote on them independently, whether or not we want what is in 3.0, whether we want what was in 4.0, or whether we want different amendments to that 1.0 or something different. So that would be presented at the next Laws and Rules meeting, which I'm also suggesting that we do another special Laws and Rules meeting. For the same reason we're doing this special Laws and Rules meeting is to make sure that our attention is completely and fully on this, and this is a huge task in front of us. The other thing, and after talking with Chairwoman Worthington, she agrees with this, is to start that meeting with public comment. I know that's not generally our practice for committees, but again, this is something that's going to affect the entire city for a long time to come. So I think it's important to have comments before deliberations instead of having the committee discuss and then the public come after we've kind of made up our mind and then went through all the discussions at the council floor, on the council floor. So I think, did I miss anything? Oh, and then the seeker is also not being voted on. That would be to June if the committee feels that they're ready to vote on it. And at any point, if the committee's not ready, then we'll hold off.
And then when, the actual whole zoning, that,
It would be after, so we would do these resolutions,
First.
start the seeker, because there's also a timeline for seeker, and Bartek, if I misspeak, please jump in. We have to pass the generic first, and then it has to be 10 days later before we pass the final statement.
Correct.
So we couldn't even vote on all of it in one meeting if we wanted to, because I don't think anybody wants to anyway.
Good, that's it?
Yeah, unless anybody has any further questions, but that's the roadmap, and if you're all okay with that, I will say this is the official roadmap sent to the rest of the council members, so they're aware of this. And like I said, I'm saying June and then July and then August, but if it's later, it's later. We want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with their votes.
Questions? How do you all feel about the three separate resolutions and separating some of the issues?
Yeah. Yes.
I think it makes sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
it's clear.
Okay, so thank you. With that, why don't we have Bartek come up and make this presentation to us and answer questions that we may have.
He's gonna go over the whole, read it line by line.
First question is for.
Where's the snacks?
No, it wasn't, we did say we were gonna bring cookies in.
You know what? That's the meeting where you're voting. So they're still cooking, but they're not quite ready.
That's not the cannabis control.
Yeah.
You should let me know there's all sheet cake left over at the K&J celebration.
All right, so I submitted, good evening, everyone. I submitted 3 items to this committee for tonight. The first is the referral comments and responses, the 4.0 version of the zoning code, and the final generic environmental impact statement. Throughout the drafting process, we've been guided by our big ideas, right? And I'm not going to go through these again tonight, but the point I want to make is that when we're deciding on what changes we're going to make from the 3.0 to the 4.0 version, we're trying to stick by what are our big ideas, what are the goals that we have for the zoning code, what did the public tell us. We're not making any decisions because we feel like it. We're rejecting any comments because of, for whatever reason. We're measuring all of our changes against these big ideas. As a reminder, we received referral comments from the Ulster County Planning Board, the City of Kingston Planning Board, and the Historic Landmarks Preservation Commission. On the sheet that I provided to you digitally, I also have printed out copies here, though you may need a magnifying glass, but it is possible. You can see. What's that?
Oh, a short one?
Do we need any
Sorry.
copies?
We can share.
You sure? Did you see?
Oh, yeah, I can read it.
You-
I can read it.
Okay. You see in the,
Couple of extra copies.
okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, also kind of. Maybe it's up.
It is also online,
Oh.
so you can't see it too.
Okay.
That's where I'm free, I just can't access it on my computer, but if you want to see a bigger print on Engage, thanks.
Oh, this is on.
It's on
Easier to read for me.
You can see in the red are comments that we rejected. For the most part, we accepted most of the county ones. We accepted pretty much all of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Commission one. For the City of Kingston Planning Board, it was about half and half in terms of what we accepted and rejected. If the comment was rejected, we included a clear justification for the rejection of that comment. The reasoning for that. I do want to call out a few of the major changes that we made in response to the referrals. The county planning board did recommend that we disallow short-term rentals from being put into accessory dwelling units. This is also a discussion that we had at the council level. So we did add in that prohibition back into the 4.0 draft. The City of Kingston Planning Board had several suggestions on corner stores. This included curtailing where they could be allowed within the city. For the most part, we did reject those suggestions. They did suggest, however, that we rename corner stores to neighborhood businesses and that we disallow from the upstairs of any neighborhood business from having any office use. Could have a residential use, but it could no longer have an office use, as we had suggested in version 3.0. Eric and Amy, do you want to say anything about either of these two items?
I think just on that second point, the corner stores neighborhood business, the big idea was to allow these, small increments of mixed use within the neighborhoods. And so we felt that, we could make this change and still have that. It's kind of, deciding where to draw the limit as far as, if the upstairs had office or not. So we did make that change, and I'm curious to hear any, reactions to that.
Can we ask questions to this?
Yes,
Or
of course.
what was the planning board's reasoning to not have offices upstairs? I mean, to me, that doesn't really make sense.
Their general perspective on the corner store idea was to significantly curtail, right, the places in the city where they could be allowed, and also limit their potential uses. So this was made coming from that perspective, that office uses don't belong in more residential areas.
Can I ask legal counsel here, or legal comment, I guess?
You could ask, my question just was for clarification of Andrea's question. So was there any limit on the types of office? Because there are lots of different sorts of offices. What was the thinking around types of offices that may not?
Amy, did we in any way define office uses? I mean, I think we provide a general definition of office uses. in the code.
Right, and
but we didn't
yeah,
get-
this is specific really to, I think, to the corner store, or now it's called the neighborhood business, type of use. There are within, some of the districts, the open districts that allow office uses by right, that you could have an office, in any type of building. You could even have, for example, in the T3 neighborhood open, which is like Albany Avenue, you'd have like just single family detached home form, but you could have office uses within them, and that's perfectly fine and acceptable. I think where the distinction came when you got to the T3 neighborhood, which is, much more residential in character. We only allowed corner store as the type of mix of use, and the comments seem to be guided towards trying to limit that type of use to really just the ground floor business, and not to have a multi-story mixed-use building in T3 neighborhood.
How does that intersect with home office capacity?
You could still have a home office.
So you can have an office in your home, but somebody can't have an office.
I'm sorry, but that makes no
So
sense. to me.
so you would have a store, have the owner of a store where he or she would have no office.
They would not be able to put a separate office business or use upstairs. It would have to be residential.
So the purpose is to make you have a corner store neighborhood business on the bottom floor, and then everything above that has to be residential. You can't.
Wouldn't that be like a lot of buildings uptown, which are businesses on the ground floor and residential above?
Right, I mean, some of those businesses have office uses upstairs, which obviously would be allowed under the zoning code, but in the more neighborhood T3 areas, that wouldn't be possible.
Right, so,
Again, I'm not necessarily defending this comment from the planning board. We rejected many of the comments from the planning board. This was our attempt to meet them halfway.
sure, I mean, we're just asking, trying to understand what the rationale would be if one were to adopt this.
Right.
I mean, to me, it almost sounds like you're trying to make less neighborhood businesses by not doing this.
Yep.
And I personally think having neighborhood businesses, corner stores, whatever you want to call them, pretty awesome. So I'm not in favor of not allowing offices upstairs. I mean, because in the residential area, I mean, most offices, like it's office hours. It's not like it's gonna be extra noise for residential, like it just doesn't, it makes no sense.
And the question, like, someone could use an accessory, right, building for an office in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, because it could be like their home office, if they have an ADU.
If it's a home office, yes, but if it's a commercial business,
Okay,
no.
okay.
Well, that might.
But that's not what this says. This isn't a commercial business office only. It just says office. I think if this is what we want to do, I think there needs to be some clarification to that. Because, I mean, how would if I just, I'm not that I'm gonna open up a new business, but if I go upstairs to do some work,
So it's going to curtail corner stores or neighborhood, and is that the goal?
That was the goal of the.
So when you say this, are you referring to like commercial spaces up top, not just like, okay, I have a corner store, but I want my office upstairs? You're talking to, all right, my second floor has potentially 3 units. I'm renting them out commercially. That's what this is referring to. And then my second question is, and you may not even know this, but how stringent are the regulations for commercial leases? Like where I'm going with this is if someone builds a building and it's easier for them to have a commercial lease where they can evict tenants substantially easier than rental units. That could incentivize building owners to make that commercial space.
Right, so I guess you're bringing up questions of enforcement or?
Not necessarily. Well, the second question is like, it was just like, do you know, like, are the commercial lease aspect of things
Yeah, probably, I can't. speak to that.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question of Dover Hole? Amy or Eric, in your experience, do you think that this would really impact how many neighborhood businesses, like this would desensitize it? Or am I making more of a big deal? It just sounds I'm uncomfortable with this.
Well, just one thing that I was thinking of as you were talking is that there is what's called a home occupation use, and so that's a use that is basically a business use, but it's conducted by the resident who lives in that space. So you would not be prohibited from having a home occupation use on the second floor, but what you couldn't have is like an commercial office space that you lease out, for others to use as primarily office space. So that's what the kind of the distinction between the office use versus the home office, which would not be, which would be allowed. So just to make that clear, it does start to, every time you just draw the line on where these distinctions are, it does start to discourage, someone from wanting to do a full commercial use in the T3 neighborhood area, for example. It kind of draws the line and limits them a bit. Every community kind of decides where they want that line. And, we did get some conflicting, points of input about the T3 neighborhood. So that's why we, came up to this as a point of compromise. We do think it's very important to allow, that ground floor commercial use and the historic tradition of the corner stores. That was one of the big ideas all the way from our very first meetings that we heard a lot about. So we want, that's, a very important idea that I think we carry through. I think, if you allow the office upstairs or not, we're certainly, wanting to hear the feedback of the group there. And I think you would certainly support that or, but want to, kind of figure out locally where that distinction is made.
It doesn't make sense to me to draw that line when we're going into T4 and T5 or more urban settings. So.
Right, I mean, this prohibition really wouldn't apply.
All right, because it says it like the way that they have a building type.
Because in those areas, general commercial as a use type is allowed. So this really only applies to the T3 areas where the only commercial use is really the corner store or neighborhood business, as it's now called.
Okay. All right, it's confusing because then it has it listed under T4 and T5.
Corner store.
Yeah, a neighborhood business.
Right, Amy, did I get that right? The prohibition wouldn't really apply to T4 or T5 because general commercial is allowed there.
That's right. So the only, and maybe we just need to clarify that it's a good clarification on the neighborhood business page, but because office is a permitted use in T4 and T5, you would be able to do it on the second floor.
Well, really, it should say neighborhood businesses only in T3.
Correct. Yeah, so I mean, at least there should be more clarification, although I'm still not in favor. I would prefer this to be rejected.
Yeah, I know some of these neighborhood businesses, they lease out their upstairs for income purposes too. So this is going to cut all of that out.
I'm just thinking in the T3 areas of where the 3 acres Terry's, which is the one place I know of, and it's only one floor. And it seems to me that through most of your 3, you only want one-story businesses anyway. So I would be in favor of saying no commercial uses on the second floor of neighborhood business.
How's commercial defined?
Amy, would you mind reading you mean the definition of general commercial?
As relevant here, what is commercial?
So there's general commercial, just reading the definition, a broad range of commercial uses and services. Examples are arcades, laundromats, retail stores, salons, shopping centers, outdoor markets, performing and visual art studio, adult entertainment, animal boarding facilities, and auto-oriented services such as car sales, servicing, car rental, and car washes, and other similar uses are permitted within limits by the transect zone. So, so that second sentence, those are the ones that have special limits on them. And this is all summarized. It's a little maybe clearer to see on the use chart, which is on page. Sorry, I want to give you the right page number. So it's in the transect standards on page 3.6. So you can kind of see within which transects are allowed some of those, those uses that have additional limits on them.
And the definition of general office is a broad range of office space, commercial, financial, medical, and other business and professional service uses. Example, professional services such as doctors, lawyers, banks, and other similar uses.
So just so that I understand, so Amy's example included a salon. So let's say somebody lives, there's 2 units upstairs, one person, they live there, but they rent the other side and they have hair braiding in the other unit. That would be prohibited under this, right?
It's upstairs, yes.
So you couldn't have a hair braiding spot. And then for the other one that you just said, financial planning, right? So somebody has like tax prep sort of thing upstairs. That, okay. So I guess my question, and thank you for the definition, Amy, and also Bartek. I'm just curious about how they relate, how those examples specifically relate to residential use, because some commercial activity feels, more compatible with the residential character than, say, a car dealership.
Also, I'm looking here, if I'm reading this correct, in T3, commercial use isn't permitted anyway. Am I reading that correctly?
Only the neighborhood business.
Yeah.
Or, sir.
Yeah, so in other words, this would be moved in T3 because since it,
General commercial is not allowed.
okay, all right, good, then I'm withdrawing my objection. I'm fully in favor. Getting.
I forgot to mention in the beginning, I did ask council members if they had anybody that they wanted to invite to ask questions, so we do have, 2 online, so I just wanted to point out, I mean, besides Dover Cole, we have Michael and Marguerite here, too, so if anybody has any questions for their specialty, just let me know, or ask them, I'm here for that.
So Bartek, these are only comments from the planning board, yes?
This specific comment is from the planning board. Yes. Yeah.
Do you want to hear more opinions? on
Yeah,
that?
any other
So,
opinions?
direction,
Because again,
that's how I feel.
Again, we're happy to bring it back to the previous version,
Mhm.
but I would want some level of consensus. This seems too prohibitive to limit the activities of a neighborhood business. So. it's not only residential.
My feeling is if you're going to allow something downstairs, you might as well allow it upstairs as well. Leave it as it is.
Depending on what, I mean, you go back to what our council was saying, you have these small neighborhood businesses. They run hair salons in their businesses. I can think of a few myself right now, and that's going to be prohibited. I think it's too stringent to do.
Now, are we saying that in general, or are we getting back to the T3 areas? So is this, are we stating this across the board?
I'm speaking
Well-
in general.
Okay.
Yeah, because it already is in T4,
Yeah.
T5, so, yeah.
Right, I mean, it's T4, T5, right, you can put anything upstairs, there's no prohibitions. This is really only the T3.
Okay.
Know this maybe, but how hard is it to change something like a piece like this in the future? How, say it's enacted the way it is right now, T3, what's in version 4. Just as an example of anything that we may be adopting or not. How difficult is it to change pieces of the
Everything
code?
can change going forward,
Okay.
yeah.
All right,
following, similar process where it is approved by the common council. Refer it out to the various agencies if relevant, but it's certainly possible.
Okay,
We
one
don't
of
wanna
our
make it
guests wants to
onerous.
speak. Can I allow him?
Okay.
Sorry, I just was trying to.
No,
make this
no,
out.
just don't want to, best we can, we want to make the code we pass be not so onerous to different types of development and different transit zones.
There he is. Hi, Michael.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, if you want to just say what you typed to me, I think the council would appreciate hearing it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for unmuting me and for including me in this discussion. I just want to bring up the point that in Euclidean zoning, which is the current code, usually uses are zoned out when they have a clear nuisance. Like, this is the history of Euclidean zoning. Industrial uses were viewed to have a clear nuisance function to them. Offices don't present that kind of same clear environmental nuisance to separate them out. And so I would argue to zone them out seems out of the spirit of form-based codes.
Thank you.
Okay, I think. got to be there. Do you have anything to say?
Not on that one, but on the first one.
Oh, go ahead.
You're right. So I thought the last meeting, we were talking about making it, what's the word I'm looking for? More financial. Blanket today.
Are you talking about the short term?
The short-term rentals, yes. So incentives to make an ADU not a short-term rental, but we weren't like banning it. Because theoretically, this is the exact same thing as the building. So if we're saying we're not going to restrict your usage for what you want this building to be, I mean, shouldn't it be the same thing? We're not restricting what you're going to use your ADU for. You're taking your money to do this. And, there are incentives that we're talking about in government that we're going to give you for making it not a short-term rental, but I didn't think we were saying we're just going to say, all right, you can build an ADU, but it's not going to be a short-term rental.
I guess I heard differently from the feedback from the council that they didn't want this prohibition put back in. And again, the argument I made is that because the restrictions on short-term rentals, in terms of the limit that we've set, and practically speaking, I don't expect that there would be many short-term rentals in accessory dwelling units to begin with.
Mhm.
But the feedback I received was that we should add this prohibition back in.
Yeah, I mean, if they're not built, then the person just doesn't have to build one to make a short-term rental. It's different in a bigger, a bigger development where they're gonna provide a couple of different types of housing. I see this completely different. I also see, I think we're, that 1% cap is going to be filled instantly. So to have this, I mean, it's going to be kind of banned just by that fact anyway. And then will that take away from a house that already is short-term rental if the ADU, like, then the person has to build it? I don't see the need of this, and very big advocate to keep ban.
Yeah, I think that in order to get units online, ADUs are gonna be most expeditious versus building, a building. So say if we were to get 10 ADUs in a ward, it's like not close to 100 units. So if we're in the middle of a housing crisis, I don't believe that it's appropriate to have them be used as a short-term rental.
Defeats the purpose of
Oh, sure,
housing.
I get that, but again, if we're telling people who want to build a corner store, hey, you can use whatever you want, but now we're telling someone, like, if I come across $100,000 and I say, hey, you know what, I want to reconvert my garage to an ADU, and then I'm gonna
But I think
Try
a
and make-
corner store promotes more good for the community than an ADU as a short-term rental would do. I mean, because a short-term rental is an ADU, who would that help benefit? The person who has it. A corner store would benefit the whole neighborhood. So I see that as a different argument. Barbara wanted to-
I don't want to interrupt this part of the discussion, but there's a separate reason. I mean, above and beyond the policy, in addition to the policy goals, there's also the fact that a structure that's used transiently has to be built differently. You can't have a transiently occupied structure that's built, with your single means of egress, your kind of typical way that you would have a lot of these ADUs, I'm imagining, being built up. They're not going to be built to like a hotel standard, which is what we would require for any certified short-term rental. You have a very different set of inspection requirements that go with it. So in addition to everything folks are saying about the need to expand housing, practically speaking, it's hard to conceive of an ADU that will be built to that standard.
Okay. Moving on. We did hear from the city planning board and the county planning board. Both had a lot of comments on the parking section. Both asked us to reinstate some level of parking minimums. We did reject those comments, and you'll see that on the sheet. However, we did accept one comment from the city of Kingston Planning Board. So we did have something in the earlier drafts called the parking demand reduction strategy. The intent for this is that for larger projects that meet certain thresholds, they have to basically prepare a strategy to describe their anticipated parking demand and how they are meeting and reducing this demand. The intent for this strategy is really that it should only apply for larger developments, which might have a lot of various transportation needs. The city of Kingston, the planning board, did request that they have the ability to require the strategy of any major site plan regardless of the size. This was also discussed during the council deep dive parking discussion on March 1st. And so we did make this change, so the planning board has the ability to request the strategy of any major site plan regardless of the thresholds. Amy and Eric, do you have anything to add on this before we take any questions?
Just eager to hear the comments and thoughts in the room. And again, this was something that we had initially drafted in the draft 3.0 of the code. As Bartek mentioned, that the intent was for that this would not apply to every submittal, but rather for we set those thresholds high on purpose because that is supposed to be apply for like the very large developments that would have a larger parking need and parking impact potentially, that they have this, that they describe how they're meeting the need and then also the steps that they are taking to reduce demand, be that provide bicycle parking or providing transit passes or whatever the steps they can make, because those projects would have a bigger impact. So that was kind of the background as to how this got introduced to the code. And yeah, this was the change was basically a compromise from the original position, just based on the feedback from the planning board and from the council deep dive sessions.
Amy, can you talk more about how much of a difference this change would do to a form-based code? I mean, how much are we stepping away from what our original intent for a form-based code would be by doing this change?
Well, I mean, one of the big ideas throughout the code, from the beginning has been about deregulating parking. And there's really a number of reasons to do that. Requiring too much parking has a number of impacts, from, environmental impacts to the amount of surface area that's impervious to walkability impacts that, it makes it, harder to fit that form within a walkable streets and blocks, and often, creates areas that are not great to walk near. It's a barrier to affordable housing because you have to give up so much of your site for parking that, less units get built. It's a barrier for economic development because, it discourages small businesses to reuse spaces maybe that, don't have parking on site. So for all these reasons and more, there's tons of articles out there about why regulating too much parking is not a good idea. The code throughout has always been about, not having zoning be the main reason why people provide parking. People will still provide parking. They will want to have spaces that for their people who live there to, if they want to lease or sell the space, they will want to have parking spaces. If they want to get a loan from the bank for the development, they will still have parking spaces. So it's not that there won't be parking spaces, but just the zoning code will not be the thing that arbitrarily sets a minimum number that, oftentimes, has been found to be too high and has resulted in, too much. So that's kind of the big background as to why it's really important to not overregulate parking. So, we had gotten some feedback about parking, particularly in this last draft, and wanting to come to, maybe some kind of compromise, concerns about, well, what if there is a big development that's just under this threshold, and it's in a space that has no on-street parking, and, really we should, try to have the ability to, see what their strategy is and how they can, how they would meet that. So that was the rationale. It would require a majority vote of planning board, and really it's how that vote or how that power is used would be, the impact. And, really the intent of the code is not to have minimum standards and not to regulate parking for all the reasons I just described. But yeah, this change would allow the planning board, if they, for a site that there is concerns about, to, basically ask the question of, have them prepare this strategy. It does not have any minimum amounts in there that they have to apply to, but, they would have to get the approval of the planning board, basically.
So I don't know if you were listening to when I was stuttering my way through the introduction, where I'm going to be presenting to the council an idea that the public has presented to, members of the public have presented to me about a parking management plan. And starting off with having a parking inventory, because one of the concerns, at least I'm speaking on behalf of what I heard on the deep dive session, was we have, it's hard to find parking spots in our two business districts, uptown and downtown. I think that's where some of the bigger concerns are, at least I heard. Bartek, I don't know if you agree with that, but that's where we got out of deep dive. And I think that parking management could be a good solution towards that versus restricting through the zoning code, which obviously is not helping because we have those parking mandates now, and we have issues with not having enough parking in uptown, downtown. So to me, it kind of proves that having these mandates doesn't actually work. And so I'm wondering if you have any experience with parking management or can talk any about that, if you think that would be a benefit that would calm some of the nerves that I just addressed or pointed out.
Absolutely. And Eric, I don't want to do all the talking. You can jump in here too. But I think that, parking management, having a parking management strategy is definitely part of the solution. And, I think, but like you said, things outside of the zoning code, not discouraging development, but, making sure that they're, having enough parking is important for your business community. So I think, seeing where the public supply is, where there's on-street parking available, where there might be shortages, where, that could help to set city policy for, running shuttles or, kind of deciding what other ways of, getting people to their destinations as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, I just don't think it's not working now to create those parking spots availability in the two districts. Going back and doing the same thing that we're doing. I know this is not the same thing as what we currently are. This is better, closer to the true form-based code that was more in 3.0, right? But I think we go with that solution, and my opinion is to go back to the 3.0 parking. So
Just to try to understand this a little better, Bartek, do you have a sense of a building that we would know that has a footprint of 10,000 square feet and or a building that exceeds 2,000 square feet to the gross floor area?
We said this again, we set the threshold quite high. I'm not sure, I don't know the recently approved buildings, what their footprints are, so I have to check.
Okay, I'd appreciate knowing that. Because I'm like the Keystone there, for example, I would imagine that number should be pretty easy to get since that's been a lot of work on that recently, and that's a fairly large project, right? But I think I agree with Andrea that at this point, we want to shy away from anything that takes us back toward the parking minimum requirements, especially if we're going to develop a more data-driven process to try to figure some of this out. Because then again, in Ward 3, there's lots of on-street parking, and so I can't imagine that even if there was an ADU to every single structure in Ward 3 to be problem with parking. So I think it's much more important for us to be clear on where these parking questions would be more acute.
So just to give some context, the City Hall building itself is about 8,000 square feet, the footprint of City Hall.
Okay, so we're talking about very large projects. We should have some law and building can be bigger than City Hall.
Turn it into a parking garage.
Thank you, Eric.
Sure.
Any other feedback on this?
Michael has, so I'm
Okay.
gonna unmute him. Michael, I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point that the higher the density, the more likely it would be in a higher density transect where there would be other types of access, and the parking provision makes sense to be inversely proportional to higher density. You don't want higher intensity of traffic congestion by vehicles with the finite road space in those areas.
Thank you. So this is gonna be one of the things that we're gonna vote on separately, unless y'all are in consensus right now on 3.0. But, so,
Yeah, I'm consensus about staying with 3.0 at this point.
the other thing is, or I could probably say good for me for a few reasons, but this is one of them, is, is that I asked him to, when we pass, I mean, we will do this, but, when we pass the actual zoning code, to include in it that we will do check-ins every year for, however long, maybe the first 5 years, and of course, this could be all changed. I talked to the mayor about that today, and he agrees too, so it'd be something like the council liaison, somebody from the administration, and then maybe, public member or something like that. So if we go with 3.0, we can always come back during that check-in and say, it's not working or it is working. So I just wanted to remind people that that's also going to be in there. I think that's something exciting time I said that to you today, so.
Any other feedback on this? Okay, and this is the last slide in terms of changes that I want to go over. In previous versions, we had let me start. One of the goals of the form-based code is to expedite or streamline the site plan approval process. And we introduced something called the Minor Site Plan Review Board. This would be a board made up of individuals from City Hall, and they would approve minor site plans. These are minor site plans, are smaller projects that meet certain criteria. We did change this in the last version to the minor site plan review process. So it's would no longer be a board. It would basically be administrative approvals by the planning department. The reason why we did this is planning believes that if there's a board, there's really no reason to have this process because it's not going to streamline things in any way. Again, it's only for projects that are consistent with the zoning code and that are smaller. The administrative approval of a minor site plan is also consistent with other New York State municipalities that have a minor site plan approval process. So for instance, in Buffalo, which has a citywide form-based code, their minor site plan review happens administrative, right? Because these are smaller projects. They basically meet the zoning code. There's no reason for having them go through a board. If the intent is to actually streamline the development process.
I understand the consequences of having a board, it doesn't streamline it. But it does make it a little bit more transparent. So is there talks on ways that we could make it more transparent, even though it's through the administration versus a board?
Yeah, so planning at minimum, planning has committed that they would post each and every minor site plan online. And potentially we could go farther, so there's some sort of public input period. If we could make it work logistically.
That would be
So
like
again, these
a
decisions,
testing most likely.
right, these decisions wouldn't be happening with no public transparency. That's not the intent.
Yeah, I would like to see, have further conversations on that.
What would be the chances of something like this, though, leading to backdoor inclusion of parking minimum requirements?
If I was, if I had a project and it met the minor site plan review criteria and the planning department made an administrative determination that I need parking, I would appeal that decision and it would go up, be bumped up to the major site plan, which requires a planning board approval. So I don't really see that scenario happening.
But then that's still,
Do you mean that the planning department would require parking even though it's not required?
yeah, we push it as a matter of course, while still in name following the rules.
Well, I think that's where the transparency could be helpful to have clear, clear justifications for, and make it super transparent. I think that would solve any, hopefully, backdoor deal.
Who would monitor it though?
Because then there's minor waivers too, right, which are variances.
Yes, so there might be a minor waiver. And if you have like one minor waiver, it still meets the criteria of the minor site plan. Potentially. But at any point, the planning administrator could say, hey, this actually isn't a minor, this has become something else, I'm bumping this up to the major site plan, it needs planning.
Can you maybe talk a little bit more about the kind of online notice that's already contemplated? Because I think maybe building on that could be helpful in addressing some of these points.
Again, I don't want to speak for planning and Sue and her department, but potentially, there's a process by which a project is posted as an application having been received. And then the project is posted, let's say, on the city's website or on Engage Kingston. And then there's, I don't know, a 10-day public comment period where anyone could submit comments on the project. And the planning administrator could take that into account when approving the minor site.
But then the decision, what's the contemplated notice for that? So is it right now, is the idea that after kind of making a determination that too would be posted, kind of like?
Oh, like the final decision? Yes, it would also be posted. Yes.
And Bartek, the criteria for major versus minor site plan, that would all be posted as well and all be set out
Right, so there's criteria listed in the code for what meets, a minor site plan designation and what meets a major site plan designation. Let me find that section. So it's, development, so it has to meet all three criteria. So if it's a special permit, it cannot be a minor site plan, automatically is a major site plan. It has to involve less than 2 acres of development, consisting only of 1 or 2 lots. And it has to be deemed what's called a seeker type 2. And the state has a list of all the projects in their regulations of what a type 2 project is. So it had to be also.
Oh, there's criteria.
Yes.
Okay.
This feels like something where the technology could be really helpful if the form is something that you fill out online and that kind of gets generated, you automatically would be screening out people who didn't satisfy the criteria.
Yeah, I mean, would that be something that we talk with Kyle about, or Sue, or just maybe have a conversation about what that would look like? I think that would be important to make sure it's as transparent as possible,
Yeah,
without putting, I mean, you all saw me spread them with kind of for technology. I mean, I get like, you know, not putting things extra, but we have an IT department, and they can set something up. It's just, okay, you just press these 3 buttons each time. There's a learning curve to it, but I would imagine it could be doable.
and then you, in healthcare planning or mental health care, you know, there's, you can get like a
Yes.
easy PAR or PAR administrative review, and there's certain document, you know, places where you can upload documents to it, and it's transparent.
Any other questions on this? Okay.
No, but before you go, did Marjorie?
Yeah, Michelle asked Marjorie to be her guest to talk about the affordability.
Inclusionary.
Thank you, and she has to leave, so if we don't mind just kind of switching topics, I just wanted to make sure Rita was okay with it.
Mhm.
All right, oh, yeah, you're unmuted, Marjorie.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm a retired BOCES teacher, and I worked with the Ulster County Coalition for Housing Justice for several years. And I'm also a volunteer with the Ulster Immigrant Defense Network. And I really do support the process of give and take that you've been going through with the Kingston zoning code, knowing that ultimately the goal is that Kingston will work for everyone, newcomers, old timers, seniors, students, singles, small and larger families, reflecting the diversity and hopefully the inclusivity of this city. And I appreciate the fact that the new code acknowledges and seeks to address the recent displacement and the dire need for new and affordable housing. My concern is that some of the language does not go far enough to embrace the majority of renters who live and work in Kingston. Using numbers from 2018, 42.9% of Kingstonians earned between $22,288 and $35,814 per year. At the lower end was 9% of the workforce who were employed in accommodation and food services. And at the higher end, those employed in transportation and warehousing, that would be at the 35,814. Other job categories within this range include retail, education services such as school maintenance, and a category known as other services, which I believe covers people who do elder care as well as childcare work. Even if in 2023 we had 15% wage increases to the 2018 categories, the people working in transportation are still only earning $41,185 annually. And of course, people who were earning only $22,000 per year in 2018 would now be making only $25,000 per year. The adjusted 2023 AMI is $112,444, I'm led to believe, based on HUD. And a household needs at least a $90,000 income to afford the proposed affordable housing you would allow in your new code. Lower income Kingstonians do not come close to your definition of affordable at 80% of AMI. I agree with For the Many and others that your code must provide more affordable units in all multifamily buildings with 20 or more units. A minimum of 20 to 25% of units should be affordable, and affordability needs to be redefined to include actual lower income households. If 120 of AMI is your ceiling, then 60% of AMI should be considered affordable as well, because that's what a good portion of your lower income households are earning in this city. It goes without saying that these lower income workers and their families are doubling up or being displaced. And if they're still working in Kingston, they're driving from considerable distances back and forth, adding to fossil fuel emissions and stress. Worst of all, they may be living in their cars or under bridges. The human cost to individuals and the wider community, in my mind, is primary. But as a community, Kingston needs cashiers, retail workers, people in the restaurant business, hotel business, childcare and elder care workers, people who maintain schools, who provide transportation, or who work in farming or food distribution. We also know when children are moved from school to school because of housing insecurity several years in a row, it is highly destabilizing. And if we want their parents to be able to have time to be with their families instead of working 2 or 3 jobs, we need to provide a higher percentage of affordable housing in any new construction. I also object to the payment in lieu clause in your proposed zoning. In my mind, such a clause stigmatizes the notion of affordable housing altogether, and the payments themselves seem like crumbs from the table for those expendable lower income folks. I don't feel they are expendable. And I know you don't either, really. So thank you for considering these comments. And take care. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you mind if we go back to the minor?
Yep, go ahead.
plan? Amy or Eric, can you chime in with this about your feelings on this change from 3.0 to 4.0?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so improving the efficiency of the code, the city's code, and city staff's ability to review smaller projects is critical to making this a highly user-friendly and usable document into the future. The original intent of creating a board per se was our initial approach to providing that usability with the code, but this approach we think is it meets the intent of that. We understand that there are still some concerns of I think a board would be it would be preferred and was it was included in the original drafts, but this still works towards that intent and that goal.
I'm sorry, but can you further go into why that would be preferred? The board?
Well, the board being a smaller group of city staff have the ability to have those conversations at a staff level. So board could mean that just a smaller internal group within that could be represent a number of departments, building safety and planning and housing. So a smaller group like that was what the original proposal was, but this again works towards that the goal of making the code work for smaller projects in the city of Kingston, and not just design a code that works for the larger projects.
So that wouldn't, if that was an internal thing, then that's not a.
Because it's still a board, it would have to function like any other board. This is Kingston.
I mean, could we call it something else?
Committee. Cabal.
So this is different from what, I'm hearing what he just described is different from, I feel like the discussion was last time, which was a board like any of our boards and commissions.
Right, we would have an open meeting, you have to do it, but if this is an internal within the administration, then
How's it different?
how is
How's
that
it different than
different?
what
I
we
mean, you
normally
guys,
have?
it's just a name, because I know you
Well,
guys meet to talk about things,
Well,
so.
because it's, PACE, Land Use Law Center, which was involved in this. It has to do with, if it's a board, then it's subject to open meetings law.
I think
And
their advice was that a board.
It's internal staff, because, I mean, that happens all the time.
right, but they're not making a site plan approvals necessarily. Right, when the staff is meeting.
Are there, so I see that you say that in the last bullet point, administrative approval consistent with other New York State zoning codes. Is a committee of some sort, whether it's an internal one or a board with members of the public sitting on it, are those also used in the state, or is there a?
For the examples that I found in Scour, they're purely administrative. So it's one plan looking at the application.
So you couldn't really find another precedent for some kind of committee?
Or was there any chance anybody from your office could look into this to see the legal?
I mean, it is sure, this is the first I'm sort of hearing the board discussed in that way. I think the discussions that PACE had were more focused on the idea of a traditional board. So we could look into the question of what other requirements there might be if it's all internal. But that also begs the question of how is that different from having kind of, one person with robust transparency sort of process? How would that be any different? If it's just a group of people who are already here in City Hall in a room making a decision, that seems in a way potentially less transparent than a process where there is kind of this notice and comment and posting and the reporting out.
Unless the transparency happens from them too, the same problems. But I mean,
Well, they.
I'm only bringing this up because I was under the impression that it was a board more in the traditional sense where we have to follow open meeting law and have meetings once a month and it would, it would not be streamlined process. So, but if the 3 members of the staff who are on this don't have to do that.
We can look into it.
All right, thank you.
I have another clarifying question. Any idea, just ballpark figure about how many of these minor site plans would be coming in on a monthly basis?
I'm not sure, just because things have changed.
I mean, are we talking about 5, or are we talking about 700?
Oh, no, closer to 5.
5.
In terms of what's currently coming into planning laws.
Okay, so we're not talking about a huge amount of material necessarily, but I think if it were an internal board, I kind of like that idea just in a sense, because I think it would be perfectly easy to make it transparent in the same way. But then if you have people scoring each application with their rationale for it, it just seems like to me that would be more eyes on the process, so that you would have theoretically more chances that they would be following the spirit of the plan.
Can Eric, give us an example of what a project might look like that would go through a minor example?
Yeah, Amy or Eric, is there what an example of a project, minor site plan project? I can get one.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a number, it's a, a wide range, but the most common types of applications you might see are small scale residential applications. So people, adding a shed in their backyard, or in addition to their house, or small things like that. So that, like, those smaller scale submissions that, the goal was to find a way to make those move through the system as efficiently as possible.
So those could be going to multiple, those are kinds of things that right now could be going to multiple boards, right? Depending.
Right now, they could go to the planning.
Okay.
And the zoning board?
If they need a variance, they will go to the zoning.
And possibly HLPC.
Right, yeah.
So which would then make it a major, right? If it, what variances and.
Right, if there's a special permit and there's a lot of variances, then yeah, it would be.
What about ADUs, would they be minor site plan?
Yeah, it would be higher.
So the administrative, the internal board would be chosen the same way that boards and commissions are put together.
Well, in the earlier drafts, when we had a board, we stated quite clearly that the board could be made up of 3 to 5 members from the building safety department, the Office of Housing Initiatives, the engineer's office, corporation counsel's office, all the departments, and planning, where the departments.
So we could include that, we could have control over that. I mean, obviously, we don't want to say names because who knows who will be here, but if we want to change that a little bit, we could, and this is only what we want to do this. So.
I think that the big idea with the minor site plan too is that, as you were saying there, is that, there's no waivers, there's no discretionary, it's basically buildings that are, following all of the rules of the code. And so kind of giving those, this shouldn't be hard to decide, right? If it meets it or it doesn't meet it. And so there's no, anything that time they're asking for any kind of special permission or waiver that would have to go to planning board. But these are, infill buildings that are, smaller scale, following all the rules, giving them a quicker, streamlined process.
So why is it preferred for the board versus one person in administration, in your opinion?
So, I mean, the idea with the board was just that it, would have, a couple people to be able to, have that discussion. But again, it kind of then it hit into recently this conversation about open meeting laws and, having this bigger process than we originally intended. So certainly we didn't want to have to, make it that, it can only have that conversation every other Monday from a certain time because the meeting was noticed. And, we wanted to give a little more, there was some concerns about, just kind of workflow and how that process could work and that it actually would not make it streamlined. So I think, but certainly, the idea of, having this, small set of, professionals within City Hall staff there that, can kind of get together and, make sure that the projects are checking all the boxes and meeting all the requirements was the original intent.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me because it has different people coming from different experiences and expertise to be looking at it, but I also understand open meeting law, so I'm kind of curious to know the answer.
Yeah, and the way that it's worded now in the code in the current draft is that the planning administrator would be able to solicit recommendations from the same people that would have been in that smaller internal group. So that language is still in the current draft.
Does anybody else have any opinions on kind of volume? Everything. Awesome.
Well, I think, the consensus here is that we just wanted to be transparent. And so the transparency issues with the administrative approval and internal, I'm just wondering how that looks and what that would look like.
Okay.
So we can come back, if you check on that, and Auditor's office, Borough Council's office will check on what the board actually, if it would be an open meeting law thing or not.
Yep. Okay, so any other thoughts, questions? Okay, so this is the summary of all the referral comments and the changes that we made from the previous draft. There are other drafts, there are other changes within the draft that are all highlighted in orange. I don't think they're worth mentioning. There are a lot of word changes. Certainly, if you see something and you want to flag it, feel free to let me know, but those are the major issues on the flag.
So I'm missing letter N.
That's good.
I'll do it.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I just have a few closing thoughts.
I wanted to I'll follow up with you about the floor area of the building where it's now including basement and attics. So would that apply just to new construction or like a home where people just store things in their attic? And
Yeah, what's
the
the,
floor area, the sum of the gross horizontal areas of several floors of the building or buildings measured from the interior faces of the exterior walls or from the center line of wall separating two dwelling units. In particular, the floor area of a building or building shall include basement space, elevator shaft, floor space for mechanical equipment, penthouse, attic space, whether or not floor related. So right now, like, so when you sell a home, the attic and the basement aren't included as livable space.
I think, which is fine. I think just in terms of the code itself, because there are certain based on the square footage, right, there's certain different requirements might apply. So the intent was that we would capture the entire building area.
Okay.
Yeah, is that right? Eric and Amy, did you catch that? Definition of.
I missed it.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Amy.
Well, I think I caught it. And, you know, that definition of floor area is actually, I think, carried over from your existing code. So there's, you know, most of the code we have taken out FAR as one of the requirements because the buildings are regulated by the height and the other form standards. But in the special district areas where we were basically carrying over, you know, the existing standards, that's where there are still some sites that have a, you know, specific FAR. And that's where this provision, the only place this provision applies. But, you know, if there's anything there that we see needs to be changed, certainly flag it. But I think this was, again, just carried over from your existing code to apply to those sites.
Thank you. I was just concerned about floor area that's not unused to be then assessed for taxes. Thank you.
Okay, so we were just zooming in on a few issues, but I just wanted to take a few minutes to zoom out a little bit. And I don't mean to in any way rush this decision-making process, but I do want to stress its importance and some of the very important aspects of that are in the zoning code. We're legalizing housing typologies that aren't legal right now, right? Accessory dwelling units, duplexes, triplexes. We're ending parking mandates. We're including real affordable and workforce housing standards, along with a host of incentives and benefits to affordable housing. We're putting in place very strict short-term rental standards and pairing them with increased fees and enforcement. And we're potentially, again, significantly reducing the administrative burden of smaller projects via this minor site plan review process. We're legalizing neighborhood businesses, bringing back a building type that we've lost. Right? We're creating a new area on the waterfront, paying special attention to the waterfront with the new special district. We're actually following our open space plan, right? And so we're prioritizing development in the areas that are already developed while preserving some of our more natural areas. We're also requiring usable open space with new residential development projects. And we're introducing, for the first time, context-based street design standards for new streets and for street retrofit. These are just a short list of the important changes that are within the zoning code. Now, asking the question, is the final draft based on thoughtful and continued community engagement and feedback? Have we carefully considered each of the form-based codes provision? I would argue yes, right? We're now in the fourth draft. We've had dozens of different meetings, online surveys. We've responded to each and every comment received on some of the early drafts. Do we attempt to balance some of the competing priorities? And again, I would say yes. Right? We've gotten, for any issue, we're getting feedback from both sides. Our goal is to find a balanced approach, keeping in mind some of the vision statements that I introduced at the beginning. Is there broad support for the new zoning code? And again, here, I'm not going to go through these, but these are just a taste of the public comments that we received throughout this process, from the local level all the way to the state level, supporting the zoning code. Here's the one of the most important questions. Is there evidence from other municipalities to support that the zoning reform is a foundational step to making housing more affordable and to offer housing choice to Kingstonians? And again, the answer is yes. There's a whole host of research that is coming out about how more flexible zoning is essential to meeting our housing crisis and our declared housing emergency. I sent this around. Even the accessory dwelling unit in California is playing a surprising role in meeting residential demand. Parking mandates and parking minimums. Since we started this process, dozens of cities have ended their parking minimums as we propose to do. Here's just an op-ed from Bonnie Watson Coleman, who's a New Jersey housing representative. This is an op-ed published yesterday. To address the national housing crisis, we must confront exclusionary zoning. And that is exactly what we have right now. We're looking to end that. So, does the zoning code support fair and more inclusive Kingston? We're talking about fair access to housing, fair access to economic opportunity, opportunities for aging in place and multi-generational living. Answer is yes. Now, I don't want to say that this final draft is perfect.
It's missing an N.
But does it move us in the right direction? And the answer is absolutely yes. So as we consider some of these final changes and take the next step, I do want to just say, we have to do the zoning reform, we have to do it together. None of us in this room are responsible for the housing crisis that we're in right now, and for our existing zoning, which was adopted in the 1960s. But I think we are responsible for changing the status quo. And there's this quote which I often hear sometimes, which is, "Hey, if we just do nothing, nothing will change in our neighborhoods." No, that's not true. Things will only get more expensive. So I think we have to think big. So that's why I'll be quiet now, but you've heard it.
Great speech. Thank you, Bartek.
A lot of work.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of the work that you put in this, and of course, this is a very important issue, so we really want to put some thoughtful consideration into it. One question though, with the form-based zoning code, what is your anticipated fate on getting a vote on this or getting this
Well,
passed?
it's up to this committee. And
We know that, I'm asking. What do you see though? What would you like to see?
So
Yesterday.
Yeah.
I do receive a lot of phone calls to my office. Homeowners looking to put in accessory dwelling units. We know there are projects waiting for the zoning code to pass. So each day that passes without the zoning code passing, those projects are stalled. They cannot happen. So I do encourage you to think about this, right? Think about the final changes. But each day that passes, things are gonna happen. So there's a balance there, of course.
Okay,
Can I piggyback on that too? I mean, this zoning is not going to fix all the problems. It's going to take a long time. So, we need to be careful. We need to be deliberate with our conversations. But we should be devoting a good chunk of our time to this so that we could get to it as soon as we feel comfortable, so that this change can start and we can start finding solutions to the problems that we know exist and have existed for a long time.
And keep in mind, this is the process the city started in 2018, late 2017, with the zoning task force. So it has been ongoing for some time.
okay. Well, like you said, we're moving in the right direction,
Just forward.
Yes.
forward.
Kingston forward.
I wasn't sure if anybody wanted to discuss anything that wasn't brought up in Bartek's presentation today, because I mean, we already have a plan of bringing forth resolutions for those three, and then we talked a bunch about parking, but we didn't talk about the others. If anybody wants to start those conversations, do you want to put thought and have those conversations in the next meeting? But I wanted to throw that out there in case anybody does have thoughts, concerns. Let's start it.
I have a question about the SDRs, just to, and I don't know if we open that up now or another time, but I know that you sent some data, Alderwoman Hirsch.
Yes.
That you got from Kai, like farmer, and I've been a little confused about how many units we're allowing in Kingston? 100 SDRs, only in certain transect zones. Currently, we already have 70 people who have the permits or whatever we call them. But if the data that you sent around is saying, I don't have it up on my screen right now, but it looked like a lot more. And so how many illegal ones are there? And I think you talked about better enforcement, but you know what I'm saying, right?
Right. So, yeah, I mean, especially the whole house. And if we're going to be grandfathering in,
Yeah, so there's no grandfathering in.
okay,
The only grandfathering in is if you already have a legal permit and you meet the current requirements, then you count as part of the cap. So right now, there are about 40 short-term rentals that have legal permits.
Kingston permit.
Yes, not the Ulster County, the Kingston permits. In the new code, we set a strict 1% cap on short-term rentals, which is about 100 short-term rentals. If there are 40 that already have permits, that means that there's only 60 permits left.
So the houses that are currently out there that don't have the permits and they're more than 60 are going, it's first come, first served to get those.
Right, so, I mean, we haven't discussed exactly with building safety, how they want to proportion, how they want to dole out the permits. It could be a random process, probably first come, first serve. But yes, we know there are likely more legal short-term rentals operating now than the number of legal permits that we'll be giving out. So we'll be reducing.
And how are we going to do that? How is enforcement with that?
Yeah, so I used some of Housing's ARPA money to subscribe to an enforcement software called GovOS. We are currently going through an onboarding process. But that GovOS will be used to track all the permits, and it also allows us to match listings with actual addresses and to send out enforcement letters. I also had an initial discussion in the Finance and Audit Committee about actually instituting real fines for short-term rentals that do not have a permit. Those fines are quite steep.
So how do, say like, in my ward, there's a house across the street. And I don't know if they're legal or illegal, they're permitted or not. There's a way to go, I could look that address up and I would be able to.
I don't know if it's publicly accessible, but you could call You call me, call building safety, they'll be, with this new system, they'll be able to tell you instantly.
Is it possible to have a dedicated email address set up for that?
The one thing that we didn't really touch on too much tonight was the affordability aspect. I know that is really a big point of interest, especially with the AMI being what it is right now. Are you receiving comments on that? Are we thinking about changing that? Or can we? I know that the AMIs are specifically set by what others, right? So is there any wiggle room in that?
I mean, we can certainly change the AMI level. My concern with lowering the AMI level at this point is that if we lower it too low or make the requirement or the too low, right? No new housing will actually be built because it will be impossible to actually meet the kind of subsidy available for a housing developer to, have to create an AMI level that's lower than what's currently stated. What we have right now, I think, is a good balance between the strong desire that we all have that affordable housing be included in the development, but also just economics of it. And looking again on our peers and other municipalities, what do they have right now? What's working? We do have a requirement in the code that the Housing Initiatives Office provide a report annually about how things are going. I mean, if we see that there's a lot of housing production, maybe we could be more aggressive in the AMI level. That's stated in the zoning code. But personally, I'm not sure we have that evidence yet. Now, having said all that, I think we can do both, right? There's the way that we get to affordability. It's not only going to be met through our zoning code, right? The council has to approve pilots, right, for some of these affordable housing projects coming through. I have my $1 million ARPA affordable housing fund that's opening tomorrow, and that AMI level is 60%, right? The zoning code is 8%. So there are other tools that we have at our disposal to make sure that we're achieving that deeper affordability. I think what's in the code attempts to balance. Provide that balance for what we want and what's possible.
Has there been any discussion between the city and the county? Because I know that the county executive just announced the Affordable Trust, and it's based on Monroe County and Ithaca's. But in Monroe County, Ithaca is a partner in that trust, and it's one. And I feel like we're a bit siloed in between the county and the city, working towards the same goal, but.
Yeah, I think the housing fund is a game changer, and it's a lot of money compared to what the city has at its disposal. I do, as you know, Kai is the housing planner in the county, and we communicate regularly. I agree on this.
Any other questions?
I just want to go on record that I feel that the 80% is just too high. I mean, it's county AMI, and it basically translates to Kingston 130% AMI. So I feel like, yes, we will get new buildings online more quickly if we don't lower the threshold, but we aren't then building for the people that are here and really need the housing and keep from being displaced or move into, better quality housing, safer housing. So, you've heard it from me.
Well,
And I just,
a lot of people feel the same way that you're feeling. What I hear Bartek saying is that there's room where we can reach our goal using different resources. Right, I think that's what I'm hearing you say, right? And I hate using the phrase give and take. I absolutely hate it. But I understand what you're saying. I do think that the AMI is is too high as well for what we have here in the city of Kingston, you know? But if there's other ways where, you know, we can revisit this,
And we will, every year.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's also the idea with forming the Kingston working, the housing working group as part of that resolution. When we separate that, is to find solutions to bring forth to housing director or the council. So, but, you know, one thing that we're hopefully would help in that direction.
But I think too, we also have other partners who are working to provide housing at lower levels. And so I think we need to keep working with them, like you mentioned, making sure that we get good pilot requests for affordable housing, that we work those through. There are also other plans that help people pay. So I think as much as possible, we want to see what we can do to help people meet their rents while still being paying below 30% of your income for rent. So I think there are a lot of tools, and it is a question, you know, what the specific number, 10%, 20%, have you, that we can keep having. But I think you're right, there's a real problem. If you reduce that number, private companies are not going to be able to do much without getting state and federal subsidies, and not going to build those kind of.
I'm sorry, that is locked already.
Okay.
Oh, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
As long as we can get out.
Sounds like a French.
Barbara.
I have a question for Bartek, well, quick comment, then a question. One, I don't just think that the impact on development is the only risk in dramatically dropping the AMI, but we can talk about that separately. I can circulate some other information on other legal concerns about dropping it too low. But for Bartek, I think there's some incentive in terms of fee waivers associated with affordability. And are those uniform, or is there any kind of scaling?
There's this, right, so there's a whole bunch of incentives that we introduced, so. There's a scaling, so depending on the amount of affordability included, the project is eligible to receive discounts on the site plan application. Site plan application costs can actually be significant, the city's charging. So again, depending on the amount of affordability included, there's a scale discount. There's also potential discounts for the payment of the parkland, which is another impact fee that the city charges.
And are those is the bottom AMI for that 80%, or are there any kind of hyper
It's
sort of?
so our metric is 80%. Right. So a project that's again up to 80%. But that's the threshold.
We could also develop potentially a sliding scale so that developments that are between 5 and 20 units, we would be at 10% affordable units. 20 to 50, we would go 15%, something like that, that would have taken into account scale for larger projects, being able to include a greater percentage of affordable units.
Yeah, so that's sort of what we have right now.
Okay.
Projects between 7 and 20 have to provide 10% affordable. Then projects over 20 have to provide additional units that are affordable up to 100%. So there's that sense.
Question about like, how much land do we have to build on in Kingston? You know, are we gonna have many projects coming online? You know, I think we talked in the low impact county meeting, low-income housing and affordable housing committee, about having like inventories, apply to the zoning code, but the volume of units we could bring online, given available housing or parcels of land that could be developed. My point is, but,
We're only 13 square miles, so like even the minor site plan, we were talking about 2 acre, I mean, yeah, 2 acres, right? We're not going a lot.
But yeah, you know, take a walk around any neighborhood and you'll find large parking lots, vacant industrial sites. There are plenty of spots where you could add.
I'm gonna get my clippers and go.
You can join me at 12 o'clock tomorrow.
That's right, that hospital should be taken down and
Yes.
housing should be built. I've been on it, I'm on it.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering, there might not be possibilities of increasing these, making more, adding more levels there. Anyway, we're not gonna know.
Okay, yeah, I mean,
That's what the working group will be looking at.
going back to my earlier comment, I don't think this is perfect. And every municipality that has introduced these, type in any municipality, inclusionary zoning, you'll find that the council is constantly tinkering, increasing, introducing new levels, constant process of learning. I don't disagree with you, right? I think maybe we need more levels. What I'm saying is I don't know, right? We need a track record. We need to figure out how this goes. That's the only, yes.
Or 8.
Okay. Everybody good?
By that, you mean sleepy?
Okay. Anything else, Bartek?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Amy, Eric, Michael, I think Margaret left. Thank you
Thank you
for,
all. Thank you for your input.
thank you for helping.
Thanks for having
Yeah,
us.
thank you. Good night.
And you, and it's Michael. And we're using 2 barbers, you know?
Good.